into the program, because I was just having a chat beforehand to say I think over time the letters have either changed or evolved or been adapted to reflect the times of the day. And today we're talking about, I think, this new letter Sogic, is Sogiesc matters. Let's start with you, Slindy. Let's talk about what is LGBTQI A plus, and has it changed? Why did it change? And also this new term we're learning about today of orientation, identity, expression, and characteristics.
Okay, the LGBTQI plus, it stands for L stands for lesbian, and G stands for gay, B stands for bisexual, T stands for transgender, Q stands for queer, and I stands for intersex. And then you have your plus. And then with the Sogic SC, it stands for sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics.
All right, I think I get you. But now I think we need to take this back right to the beginning. I want sometime to be explained to, like I was 5 years old, to get a deeper understanding of the concepts we are talking about, because these are concepts that we need to create awareness and understanding with different communities. Let's talk to you, Nonhlanhla. It's been described what the letters mean, but can we delve deeper when you say, instead of just saying this person is gay, what does it mean to be lesbian? What as opposed to being transgender, or to being queer, or being intersex? Because people can use these terms interchangeably and maybe in a confusing manner. Maybe if we could break us down so to understand how then to better identify.
Sure. So I think, as you sort of initially put it in your introduction, these are primarily terms that at most times we've adopted insofar as language use is concerned. So I know if this show were done in vernacular, we would really have struggled.
Yes.
Because of the fact that these are very much borrowed terms insofar as they come from a context that is psychological, gender, insofar as academia is concerned, but also insofar as the language that is about human rights. So, when we talk about lesbian, gay, and bisexual, we're really talking about what is enshrined in our Constitution insofar as the equality clause. Sexual orientation, that we are people that should not necessarily be discriminated against on grounds of who we are attracted to. So, being bisexual would basically mean one is attracted to both male and female sexes, whereas a lesbian would ideally be a female-bodied person that is attracted to those of the same sex, and the same applies when you talk about gay, that you're primarily referring to male-bodied or men that are attracted to other men. So it's very specific, very precise, but at the same time, I think what comes out of the concept of talking about sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics is us therefore being a little bit more inclusive, and us being more understanding at this point in our lives that while in a particular context we understood being gay, being lesbian, being bisexual as almost boxed and specific, that actually when it comes to human identity and attraction, these are prisms that perhaps are not cast in stone, as we say that. But simply put, really the two expressions, so the SC and LGBTI, really has a lot to do with sexual orientation, gender identity insofar as transgender, where we would have been a country and a community that understands the identity, gender as man and woman. But ours is, but what happens to us that are perhaps born a particular, assigned a particular sexual identity at birth, and yet how we live our lives is such that we see ourselves and experience, visualize ourselves as the opposite gender. So once again, it is identities and articulations in language that time has brought us here. And I think with Sogi SC, the understanding is there's just so much more to a person than is in name. And finally, intersex, really talking about individuals who at birth are difficult to have assigned male or female as it is in our birth certificate. And as a result, we've made the exception to say perhaps there's more ways of identifying than just the status code and just what has been seen as the norm because of our diversity and class.
Indeed. No, I'm still with you, Nonhlanhla.
Yeah, that's where intersex is at. And I think the plus is really the recognition that there is more to sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics than what meets the eye. And I think really for the listener at home, it's just a reminder that, normally when a child is born, we tend to be a community and practitioners that look between the legs. And ours is, it's so much more to a person than what meets the eye, than what you see between the legs.
Indeed, there's no better explanation than that. I think from what you just did for us, now we have a better understanding that these are not just terms that are interchangeable, that can be thrown or bandied about. There is a particular a descriptor that is used for a particular reason. And if you also want to participate, we have an open line 0800 142 446, and then you can call us in and send us your questions, and also hit our social media platform: Facebook, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, and on Twitter it's at DOJCD_ZA. Now let's talk to you, Ms. Twala, to say the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development has been very heavily involved in pushing awareness in communities. Why is it particularly this department, say, as opposed to social development or maybe Home Affairs, that is really pushing this education and this awareness in these matters? Oh, I think we've lost Lindile. We have lost Lindley, so we still have. Okay, fine. I think we'll continue with you, Nonhlanhla, and I think I'll just pose it slightly different. Let's talk about where we are as a country right now. I think before we move forward, what is the status quo in terms of the understanding and the protection of the rights of the members of the LGBTQIA plus community?
Sure. So our protection, primarily in a country like South Africa, is derived from the concept human rights as enshrined in the South African Constitution under Chapter 2, Bill of Rights, and of course Section 9, the Equality Clause, where there's the expression about the fact that neither the state nor an individual citizen has the right to unfairly discriminate against the other. And it mentions a variety of grounds, but it specifically articulates sex, gender, and sexual orientation. And of course, that's really where it all starts. And then what you see over time is that we've got quite a number of legislation that has been enacted from the angle where you're looking at us being seen as people that actually are in relationships that are equal to family. To an extent where we talk about being able to adopt, being able to have our partners on our medical aid for those that can afford to, when it comes to issues around gender-based violence or even domestic violence, the recognition that we are in relationships that may be subject to violence, even between us as individuals of the same sex or in transgender relationships and identities. So in legislation and policy, therefore, we found ourselves in a situation where there's been quite huge advancement. Regrettably, when it comes to where we are in a societal perspective, we find ourselves being people who are unfortunately still subject to weird levels of discrimination. And I think the terms coined in the recent past, hate crimes, really speaks to what we're experiencing quite more frequently, where we find a lot of us being kicked out of our own families, at times stoned to death, if not violated sexually and beaten up, or cast aside and rendered marginalized just because of who we are insofar as sex identity and gender identity, but also insofar as who we are likely to be in relationships with, where it will be people of the same sex or where one is transgender, where, as indicated earlier on, I'm perhaps assigned female at birth, I live my life as a man, perhaps I'm attracted to a woman and date a woman, and upon being discovered, find myself being subject to violence because someone hates who they think I am, or the mere fact that I'm subscribed to the group transgender or even LGBTI or queer.
Indeed. I think we've got Slindile on the line. Slindile, I think we're getting a sense that there is a societal perspective which says that we have a long way to go as society because there is heinous hate crime still being perpetuated against members of the LGBTQIA+. And then now, as a department, you've basically engaged on this program to do talk shows and create understanding. How important is the department's role in promoting the human rights, and also why is it your department running with this instead of maybe social development or any other department?
I think for the Department of Justice, it is important because our main role is to implement, respond, and prevent sex and gender-based violence crimes committed against the LGBTI plus persons. Also, as a department, we are trying to strengthen the government's ability to respond to the needs and specific vulnerabilities of the LGBTI persons. Also, we are trying to strengthen the capacity of the civil society organizations, the CSOs, to deliver related services to the LGBTIQ plus persons. Furthermore, we are not working in isolation as a department. We are working with other departments where we are improving the linkage with other departments, which include programs within the DOJ such as access to justice.
Understood. And then take it further and look into the idea of sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics. When I see it, essentially it can be broken down into the different sections. There's the idea of sexual orientation, idea of gender identity. There is also expression and also sex characteristics. I think this is now the focus where we want to go to. Now, these programs of now looking into this, what is the intention here of taking us to understand the differences between sexual orientation, gender identity, and also what are the differences between the orientation, the gender identity, the expression, and the characteristics? Nonhlanhla, are you still with us?
Sure, I'm still here.
There's the issue of the SOGIESC to say we are now breaking it down and getting to the bottom of it. What's now are the differences between the orientation itself, the gender identity, the expression, and the characteristics, so that people can have a broader understanding of the matters?
I think earlier on when one was introducing or at least speaking a little bit into the different identities or definitions in the fight, and another is concerned. When we're trying to get at it, for instance, when we talk expression, the mere fact of how we assign our sexual identities is there. On that, we're still a country and practitioners that are likely to first look at what's between the legs and then say, because of what you have, then you therefore shall be assigned a particular sexual identity. But before you've been allowed a chance to grow up, discover your own self and express yourself the way that you want. And this expression could be in the way you speak, could be in the way you dress, could be in the way you carry yourself, it could be the way you address yourself. And too many times, and I think this relates to a case we had in Cape Town, 2004, a young girl where a group of boys in a neighborhood asked her, so you're a tomboy? And her response was very much, no, I'm not a tomboy, but I'm a lesbian. It was her way of expressing how she sees and views herself. And based on that and their own understanding of what lesbian could potentially be, she found herself being stoned to death literally a few meters away from her own home. Now, it's just one way that we find how we express who we are becoming a challenge, and a result or what becomes a reason for somebody else to therefore discriminate against us and even go as far as violating and killing us. But what you see as well when it comes to us accessing services is that if I'm someone assigned sexual identity female at birth, or maybe let me use a different example, assigned male at birth, of course, some of my characteristics as I grow up might be a bit predominant, and therefore how I'm dressed might be such that as I approach a facility, perhaps a clinic, perhaps even safety and security to report that I've been violated in a particular way, but the person that receives me looks at me, judges me from how they see how I've expressed myself in dress, or perhaps in how I speak. Immediately with that comes the response that is either negative, and if it is not negative in words, it's negative in doing. So the context of expressing how we express ourselves and how we violate it and therefore subject to discrimination and prejudice because of how we express ourselves is where that comes in. Sex characteristics, as indicated, is very much a country that looks at what's between the legs to judge you, looks at what's between the legs to figure out whether I want to be in a relationship with you or not. And should it be that I'm assigned male at birth, live my life as a woman, you and I meet up at the ship some way, find an attractive woman, take me out. And then it turns out that, hey, my sexual characteristics are not necessarily aligned to what you thought it would be because of what you saw. Why do I live in the private space? You are likely to abuse me, violate me, not kill me. So these are the traits that insofar as clergy SC, and therefore the work of the task team on hate crimes is responding to the very same violation that is as per how we perceived, how we understood, just because of who we are insofar as identity, expression, but also what we have no control over, our own sexual characteristics.
That was actually very thorough. I actually have now a better understanding of the matters that you can actually break it down further. It's not just what's above the surface. I think Slindile has also joined us back on the line. Now, I think it's also important to also look into the work, the role and the mandate of the National Task Team, because it's been referred to in this conversation once or twice. I think we've lost Slindile once again. But you are a member of the Provincial Task Team in Atlanta. What is the National Task Team and what led to its establishment?
So basically the history is, and I think when it comes to the case I mentioned earlier on in Cape Town, this was 2004, where we start documenting instances where an individual has been subject to a barbaric response to who they are, or how they identify, how they express themselves. But what you see happening in South Africa is 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, quite a rise in instances that we refer to as hate crimes. And I think what brought us to where we identified the formation of the task team was having understood, coming from an LGBTI perspective, as activists on the ground, people defending the rights of LGBTI, that hey, so so many cases are going to court, or at least are being reported with SARS, but they are not making their way to court. And should they be making their way to court, even the sentencing that you get just doesn't give you the idea that, you know what, this person needed to be given that sentence. In other words, where we located it deserves a harsher sentence. I mean, if you're going to take some child's life and act, I reckon, and please excuse the example I'm going to make, but where you, in fact, even before you do that, incidents that we've had here in KZN, the child was raped first, chopped into pieces, dumped into a public toilet, and still burned. To have that level of hate and still have that case going in and out of court and not necessarily giving us a harsh sentence, but like a 15-year sentence, it's a slap in the hand, and it gives an ordinary member of the LGBTI community the indication that, you know what, our lives are not taken seriously, our lives do not matter. So the petition to the presidency 2011 led us to a situation where the office of the president assigned Department of Justice this task. Look, this is about people having confidence in the justice system of South Africa. And what best way to do it than to have a specific justice whose job is to make sure that these matters are monitored, that where incidences have been identified, they are reported and actually are in the system, followed through to an extent where there is a judgment on a matter, and if it means sentencing. So this has really been primarily our task as the national task team. And of course, you had alluded to it in the introduction, that there's also what they call the rapid response team, which really is very much about fast-tracking those incidences, because we know the wheels of justice is really slow. So the question, how then do you speed up that process as best as possible? So this is how then you might sound like it's two different task teams, but it's actually a rapid response team within the task team as set up since March 2011 to specifically make sure that these incidences are reported, that the cases are in the system, that they are thoroughly and specifically and closely monitored, but that ultimately justice is served.
Now, just to talk about then the rapid response and the work they've done since 2011, has there been then an increase in the arrest, the prosecution and the sentencing of perpetrators of hate crimes and GBV crimes, specifically to people of the LGBTQI community?
Well, we've had some, and I'm hoping I got the questions right, but we've had some success insofar as cases that have been officially reported and monitored and have gone through our courts, and yes, deserving sentences have gone into them. But it's unfortunate that there's quite a lot of others that have not, and as a result, you may be aware that quite recently, at least the past 2 years, South Africa is going through a process in time where we are developing, or at least have developed what is called the Prevention of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill, currently before Parliament. There's also a bit of investment happening within our communities to try and make sure we fully understand what it is and how this will help us affect LGBTI, but also making sure that the sentences was considered the fact that the motive had hate wasn't just by chance that I found myself being assaulted or found myself being robbed.
there's many practical examples that or questions that bring into the fore just to make this very practical. Now, I'm looking at the Department of Home Affairs. Now, how has Home Affairs come on board in assisting people that want to get identity books and birth certificates, and that will identify them correctly? At this point, is Home Affairs that you can and then get your ID birth certificate and have your gender assigned correctly? They have those systems, and you then will move on to other public services like healthcare. Are they inclusive? The South African Police Service, when we report cases now, is there the sensitivity that is required to take down cases of GBV or femicide?
Most countries are South Africa we have on the hand. If you just have to judge us according to that, we're really one of the best in the country so far as the protection and promotion of the rights of all people, including LGBTI. However, we need to remember as well that the people that are providing services, these people servants, are human beings too.
True.
And while systems might have been put in place to make sure that there are standing orders, there are memos, that basically and guidelines in certain contexts that are supposed to assist you to do your job better as a person employed or in the employer. We are aware that there will be go to a local Department of Home Affairs as an individual certified as transgender to say, I want to have my gender marker changed and not get the service. And yet, somebody else in Gauteng goes to Home Affairs, exactly the same service, gets it done. It's the same department, same procedures, except that the person on the implementing those procedures.
So the attitudes of officials is what differs.
So we do have issues with the attitudes of the professionals or the service providers, and I think that's where our job is so far as members of the task team, either as civil society, as government counterparts, or even as business. Our job is to making sure that those that are not delivering as expected are brought to book. They themselves, in the sense capacity issue, build their own capacity, because ultimately we want the person to be able to access services. So yes, the National Task Team is already, you might have articulated in the beginning of the I think we sort of brought it to the fore as well, that it may be led by the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, but the partners within government that are there supporting include Home Affairs, include Education, include Department of Health, your staff, your correctional services, your domestic, what you call it, your Department of Social Development, and many others. So together,